Good evening, and welcome to all of you to the 2022 Picard lectures. These endowed lectures were set up by the Picard family to explore the interconnection between creation, theology, and ethics. And we are so grateful for the Picards. Frank and Betty are with us tonight. They drove down from Bismarck, North Dakota. Over dinner, I asked Frank, how did he become interested in ecological issues? His is very simple. My name is Francis. What did you expect? Although I think he was a saint, so got a way to go here. So glad that all of you are here. Our students care very, very much about this issue, as you know. Of late, we have established a new program in eco-justice, and I encourage you, before you leave tonight, if you've not read about this program, please do so, because it is inspired by our students. It is one of the most urgent issues, as you know, that faces the church, faces society, and we want to be a lead learner in it, to quote Dr. Demian Wheeler. I appreciate the work of our dean, our faculty, and our students who put together what ought to be a part of this curriculum. As we think about this lectureship tonight, and our dean will introduce Dr. Keller in just a moment, we think about, for the last dozen years, every 2 or 3 years, we have the Picard lectures. Earlier this evening, we were with Dr. Judith Scoville, who gave the very first of these lectures and who maintains such concern about environmental issues. In establishing the endowment, the Picard family especially wishes to remember the deep appreciation for God's creation they shared with the late David and Roland Picard. As a boy, Frank grew up a lot of the time outdoors. And when things were hard at home, he said, there was always the land to support us. That's deeply, deeply meaningful. So those of you who are students, welcome. Those of you who are alums, welcome. Those of you who are viewing us from afar, welcome to you. This should be a rich evening as we think together about creation, about justice, about our participation. Let me call on the dean to do a formal introduction of our lecturer.
Thank you, President Marshall, and thanks to all of you for coming this evening to join us here in person, and 92 and growing, those of you joining us on Zoom. This is a fantastic night, a wonderful event. It's my privilege to introduce the distinguished speaker that we have for us tonight, which is Dr. Catherine Keller. I feel like I've gotten to know Catherine a little bit these last couple of days, maybe not in the way that we would have most liked to get to know each other as we're on the phone figuring out how we might be able to solve the airline's problems. But we, alas, we're not able to solve those problems. But so unfortunately, Dr. Keller can't be with us in person tonight. But we're very thankful for the technology that allows her to join us in this way. And we can still feast on the wonderful words that she will provide for us. You may have the program available digitally, or here you have copies of it, but let me just read this bio. Dr. Catherine Keller practices theology as a relation between ancient hints of ultimacy and current matters of urgency. as the George T. Cobb Professor of Constructive Theology in the Theological School and Graduate Division of Religion of DrewUniversity. She teaches courses in process, political, and ecological theology. Within and beyond Christian conversation, she has all along mobilized the transdisciplinary potential of feminist, philosophical, and pluralist intersections with religion. Her most recent books invite at once contemplative and social embodiments of our entangled difference, Facing Apocalypse, Climate, Democracy, and Other Last Chances. This one here. We have a number of our students I know who are reading this book or have read it very recently. Political Theology of the Earth, Our Planetary Emergency and the Struggle for a New Public in 2018. Intercarnations on the Possibility of Theology in 2017. And Cloud of the Impossible, Negative Theology and Planetary Entanglement 2014. Keller's other books include On the Mystery, Discerning Divinity and Process 2008, God and Power, Counter-Apocalyptic Journeys 2005, Face of the Deep, A Theology of Becoming 2003, Apocalypse Now and Then, Feminist Guide to the End of the World 1996, and From a Broken Web, Separation, Sexism, and Self 1986. I would say you have a lot of potential, Dr. Keller, as a scholar, and we're so happy to hear your wonderful words, wonderful way of words, theological and philosophical depth on this issue between ultimacy and matters of urgency. Welcome, Dr. Keller.
Well, thank you all for coming to a lecture on this unfun theme of apocalypse after all. And let me especially thank Dean Kyle Roberts and President Marshall and Ashley Hovell for all your work on this. And of course, the Picard family who have made possible this lecture series. What an important contribution to environmental theology and ethics, to the earth itself. Of course, ecology is all about shared embodiment. So I am sad that I couldn't be with you in a full-bodied way. I say that with Kyle Roberts' beautiful theological work on the flesh of the incarnation in mind. I learned just 12 hours before my trip that the flight had been canceled. Dean Roberts' immediate and gracious response assuaged my upset. And of course, I have a voice in my head that says, it's not the end of the world. That reassuring cliche actually takes us directly to the topic of this Picard, the apocalypse, because I'm claiming that even the apocalypse is not the end of the world. Apocalypse may just be the most forceful word in our vocabulary for expressing collective catastrophe, global doom, but apocalypse is not the same as doomsday. Apocalypse doesn't mean the end of the world, not even of the earth. And that's maybe the main point of my book, Facing Apocalypse. The ancient word apocalypsis does not mean final closure. It means present disclosure. The Greek apocalypsis meant originally an unveiling, used primarily of the bride's removal of her veil on her wedding night. That biblical unveiling certainly does reveal destructive trends, however, but not final destruction. And the book of Revelation does actually end at a wedding, a rather queer one between a city and a lamb. No more full-bodied occasion, though, in the ancient world than a wedding. And here the erotic metaphor comes charged in the book of Revelation with energies of incarnation and resurrection. But my point will not be to assure you of a happy ending to human history, any more than to pronounce the end of our world. Faith and possibility is something else. I'm going to let Emily Dickinson take us there. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors. But why then open the door of the apocalypse at all? after all? Well, I wrote this book because we are not going to stop hearing frequent public references to the apocalypse. Global warming guarantees apocalypse is going to have recurrent headline status. And I don't mean just histrionic headlines, but responsible ones, the kind you can't just write off. For instance, as I was just getting going on my book, the headlines of the so-called insect Armageddon in Europe, then the insect apocalypse in the Americas were buzzing in my brain. Due to climate change and agribusiness chemicals, the insect population has plunged precipitously in the 3 continents studied. And it's the basis for the whole food chain, not to mention crop pollination. The entomological message was, however, not that it is now simply too late. The point is more creepy and crawly. It's to reveal a catastrophic danger of our collective situation so that we might face it and maybe even respond to it responsibly. Examples multiply. During the 2020 fire season, the LA Times headline flashed, "A climate apocalypse now. Climate change is only worsening the record-breaking wildfires, heat and air pollution in California and the West," a long headline. That was before the unthinkable worsening of the fires over the following year in California. I'm very tuned to California, Southern California. I did my doctorate there. Again, the point of that particular journalism is not game over, California is toast, but wake up. The situation persistently exceeds the natural cycle of wildfires. Catastrophe is kicking in for the long haul. It does not add up to the end of the habitable world or even of California. Yet it might, short of adequate speed and scale of response to climate change. In the meantime, the language of apocalypse might help garner attention. But also, and in spite of good intentions, it still signals to a broad public, doomsday is near. Why bother with the struggle to lower greenhouse emissions for the sake of a long term that we no longer believe in? Better just lower the cost at the pump and get on with our lives now. So maybe we should all do what we can to fine-tune the public understanding of apocalypse. I mean, especially, but not only, we who work with religious and spiritual publics. We need to keep the discourse of apocalypse honest, which means to free it from the onus of literal predictions and doomsday misreadings. Yet it means also to recognize certain ancient resonances with present history. These resonances have an ironic edge because, of course, there is no straightforward present connection with those 2,000-year-old prophecies. Prophecy is not the same as prediction. It isn't about foretelling future facts. The biblical prophets read deep historical patterns entrenched in civilization, patterns so powerful that they were not going to be readily overcome. Faithfulness to the Bible means then reading bi-contextually, its context and our own. So it means reading the book of Revelation with fresh and open eyes, not the eyes of biblical fundamentalism, which ignores the ancient context. Biblical scholarship offers the corrective as it centers itself on the ancient context. But theologically speaking, the symbol of the apocalypse demands more. It also requires meditation on the ancient symbolism in its current resonances. Theology requires a practice of attention to our current context. So for this project, I called the approach an apocalyptic mindfulness. And speaking of current context, history moves faster than any book. In late February, 2 apocalyptic symbols that I had done little with in this book suddenly galloped across the horizon. The first 2 of the 4-horse quartet of Revelation 6. I had meditated in the book on the second pair of horsemen, on the black horse of economic injustice, suggestive of global capitalism, and the green one of plague and attacks from wild animals, resonant, metaphorically, with the current crises of virus and, of course, ecology. Not predictive, resonant. But now it is the white one that has exploded into view, flooding our TV screens with unbearable images of destruction. The one whose crowned rider, says John of Patmos, came out conquering and to conquer. And next to him gallops the red one with a great sword who takes peace from the earth. Conquest and war. Not that Revelation predicted Putin's invasion, no more than it predicted the hundreds of other invasions since John wrote down his visions. During the weeks leading up to the invasion, the Ukrainian foreign minister had very reasonably urged his people to ignore apocalyptic predictions. Other news sources now ask the question of the Ukraine as a possible step towards the apocalypse, by which is meant nuclear exchange. In fact, I then found a 2019 article noting that Putin has spoken more about the nuclear apocalypse over the past 15 years than any other national leader, causing speculation all along about his intentions. Nonetheless, the gallop of the white and red horses does not portend some predetermined final and fatal outcome. It does metaphorically unveil catastrophe already advanced and threatening worse, as we just began to emerge from the COVID plague, only to face conquest and war unprecedented in Europe since World War II, hooked right into the issue of non-renewable energy, and with nuclear power in perilous play, the rhythm of those ancient hoofbeats has deep reverb. Frankly, the question of nuclear destruction had been a key motivation of my 1996 book, Apocalypse Now and Then, subtitled A Feminist Guide to the End of the World. Oh, there it is. And yes, with the irony of the now and then, I did mean to deconstruct the single telos endpoint of the apocalyptic mythos. I wanted to interrupt the whole sense of linear history roaring to a determinate goal, whether through Christian doom or through its secularization in the form of modern progress, or, as in the case of right-wing US politics, of both, imminent in-time presumptions bizarrely yoked to an endless capitalist optimism. In this country, Protestant dispensationalism riveted around predictions of the end times, always imminent and then always rescheduled. And that's been going on vocally for almost 2 centuries. This premillennialism hooked into the Hal Lindsey late great planet Earth fundamentalism that forged a Christian political right wing, so successful as to enable the election of Ronald Reagan, who is on the record agreeing with his friend Hal that the end would come through nuclear war with the Soviet Union, of course, in their lifetime. And they weren't young, and the president possessed the nuclear codes. So that could have meant the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy. So even though I am not a biblical scholar, I plunged into the apocalypse with deep distaste for that old text. And no doubt I directed too much irony at John of Patmos's determinist and especially his misogynist proclivities. And I came to think that the nuclear version of the apocalypse might be left in permanent safe storage. To be honest, after writing that book, I had hoped that I could leave the apocalypse, the metaphor and the text, in the 20th century. But in this century, it was the relentless pace of global warming that returned me to John's apocalypse. Compared to nuclear exchange, what a quiet catastrophe climate change portends, doesn't it? But here's a spectacular fact, a noisy one. Apparently, the current rate of warming of the ocean is equivalent to the explosion of at least 3 nuclear warheads every second. Right, every second. I kept double checking that bit of factual imagery, and it keeps coming up as the case. But the US religio-political right, with its aggressive misuse of the Book of Revelation, keeps the climate change denialism of the Republican Party fired up. Hey, if the Lord is coming soon, why bother with environmental repair? The supernatural hope of the religious right thus serves the ecological indifference of the dominant neoliberal form of capitalism. So it operates in cynical allegiance with the hyper-secular economism that runs not just much of US politics, but much of the world. On the other side of the political spectrum, there is, as I mentioned, a more recent version of apocalyptic determinism. It has quietly emerged on the left, usually in response to global warming. It is, unlike its opposite, scientifically informed, and it tends to ignore any connection to the Book of Revelation. This version of apocalypse thinks we are too late to address climate change seriously. And so it de-energizes its own progressive commitments. So on the one side, we have the "we're saved, praise the Lord" capitalist denialism. And on the other side, the "too late, why bother" nihilism. Between the junk optimism of climate denialism and the paralyzing pessimism of climate nihilism, self-fulfilling prophecies of doom keep spiraling around Western civilization. Given those apocalyptic resonances, I returned to the Isle of Patmos in the spirit, not in the flesh, unfortunately. I hear it's a beautiful island, and wrote Facing Apocalypse. Facing into this unveiling is eye-opening, but never comfortable. Nonetheless, there is no flat end of the world anywhere in the Bible. Many big endings, yes, as there are in the world, as for example, the Brazilian anthropologists Stanowski and Viveiros de Castro remind us in their book entitled The Ends of the World. Well, it's kind of nice to be at home. I can show you books. They are thinking not of the Bible, but of indigenous peoples in South America, particularly the Amazon. And in the Bible, there is no totality of termination, but there are remembered and anticipated mass destructions, human and non-human. And because we won't soon escape such mass destructions, I figured more of us need to spend a bit more time with the metaphor of the apocalypse itself. Because the apocalypse is, of course, no mere metaphor. My book calls it a metaphorse. And of course, in this century, it is not only climate change spliced with pandemic and now with war that has been evoking apocalypse. Speaking of evocation, watch for J. Cameron Carter's book, The Religion of Whiteness, an apocalyptic lyric. It's coming soon. It unveils, with his brilliant poetics of radical disclosure, the layers of systemic destruction that have sacralized white supremacism as the very condition of civilization as we know it. No doubt it's just a coincidence that the horse-bearing conquest and colonization, the origin of white supremacism, happens to be white. And on the American race front, with a less theopoetic apocalypse, another example from the American race front, let me cite theologian and old friend Rita Nakashima Brock, who, by the way, is moving to the Twin Cities very soon. She wrote the following in response to the January 6, 21 insurrection. As I watched news reports of the violence, she wrote, I had the unsettling thought that I was watching a national apocalypse unfold. Thoughts about apocalypse had been on my mind as the pandemic surged and George Floyd's murder captured global attention, igniting the largest social movement in US history. Hey, that Minneapolis reference is sheer coincidence. Like most critical thinkers, Rita Brock had, until then, always opposed any use of apocalypse, in part because right-wing evangelicals use it to deflect challenges to their white male supremacy. Indeed, that edge of reactionary Christian apocalypse was key to the conspiracy cults like QAnon that helped fire up the January round of Trumpocalypse. And by the way, I thought I had coined the term Trumpocalypse, only to learn it was already the title of a 2018 book by McGuire and Anderson, who are two Trump supporters, great admirers. Multiple issues, too many, too intense. And they keep mounting up. Race, COVID re-arising, and now the Ukraine, and eco-apocalypse gets thrown always back into the background. And yet none of these issues can be separated from their environment. Jacqueline Patterson, an African-American civil rights leader, puts it from the race angle thus: economy, food, housing, transit, all of these are civil rights issues, and climate issues intersect with every single one. Such intersectionalism unveils the extent of US white exceptionalism. And at the same time, it challenges the single issue politics of progressive versions of exceptionalism, as in, only my issue really counts. Of course, the complex intersectionality can overwhelm, can feel too global, too much, too hard to address. But apocalyptically speaking, the feeling of impossibility is tempting, but at the same time, might these intersections unveil, open up the possibility for solidarities broad enough to alter the world, the chance, not the assurance, not the guarantee, but the improbable possibility? Still, you might ask, what does such revealing intersectionality have to do with the archaic imaginary of the book of Revelation? That old letter did not foresee white supremacism, neoliberal capitalism, or its carbon emissions, democracy on the rise or in demise. John of Patmos was not predicting the facts of any future. To repeat myself over and over, prophecy in the biblical tradition does not signify prediction of facts. Prophets read social patterns, civilizational patterns entrenched so deeply that they are likely to last way too long. The book of Revelation, like most biblical prophecy, narrates a sequence of visions. These visions are like waking dreams that criticize the deep patterns from the vantage point of a barely thinkable alternative. Prophecy, we must teach our people, is not the simple decoding of a factual message. It is a kind of radical dream reading, which in turn invites our dream reading of the prophetic text. Those civilizational patterns are triadically dream read by John as the two beasts of sea and land. Those two are code for the global power of the Roman Empire. And thirdly, as the whore of Babylon, who is code for Rome's version of global trade. Hence the 28 luxury commodities John lists out in Revelation 18 as no longer available when she falls. I won't read them all: jewels, purple dye, wine, etc., and climactically, slaves. The merchants John intones, were the magnates of the earth. When I worked on this feminine image of Babylon earlier in Apocalypse Now and Then, I was fixated on John's misogyny. And of course, the sexism of the image of a global slut cannot be just erased. But in this round, I was more interested in John's intended message. And that meant dream reading with him, that whore of Babylon, as a systemic appetite so greedy that it commodifies even its own flesh. Seems to me his imperial porn queen reads as ancestor of the lascivious desire globally cultivated by neo-imperial capitalism. Of course, politics and economics have undergone great shifts in 2000 years, some of them promisingly anti-imperial and post-colonial. But might we agree that nonetheless, a deep civilizational pattern of global power and transnational greed has brought us to our present environmental edge? And from the perspective of that edge, global warming, it sounds too close to warning, global warming is also anachronistically dream readable in John's letter. The seventh seal opens after a dramatic silence, and then there is revealed 1/3 of the trees of the earth burning, 1/3 of the life of the sea dying, and so forth. And an eagle lamenting, "Uai, uai, alas, alas to the inhabitants of the earth." The inhabitants signify all the planet's living creatures, not just us humans. In the face of mass extinction, such an ancient face, this face of mass extinction, is the eagle already voicing what we now call eco-grief? And soon the 24 elders sing a dark lament of it being the time for the destruction of those who destroy the earth. Not to be confused with time for the destruction of the earth, as fundamentalists often hear it. That is a convenient misreading, since so many right-wing Christians support the economic structures destructive of the earth. If this archaic tumult of symbols matters now, it is because something of its dreamy and nightmarish pattern keeps on materializing. Not, I repeat, because the text is an encryption of the future, nor is it any kind of factual proto-science. It does not take the place of climate science or anti-racist education or LGBTQI struggles or peace work. It is just that more of us who are concerned with the public effects of religious symbols need to face the ancient apocalypse. And this is first of all to help face our own fears of coming doom. More of us, clergy people, activists, academics, may want to face the political theology of apocalypse. Its messianic anti-imperialism, its warning of a mounting spiral of planetary destruction, and also its imagination of that odd bride, the multinational post-imperial urban utopia, the New Jerusalem. In other words, I am hoping that an occasional exercise in dream reading the apocalypse can help to surface potentials working unconsciously and collectively, not as timeless archetypes, not as fundamentalist stereotypes, but as ancient prototypes. By keeping those meta-forces conscious, prototypes both reactionary and revolutionary, both destructive and constructive, both sacralized and secularized, we can help to reconfigure their effects with apocalyptic mindfulness. But does that sort of reconfiguring, reassembling, rereading let us expect that some futurist version of the glittering New Jerusalem will finally come down from heaven? Well, surely not in any guaranteed or literal sense of a top-down new creation from nothing. Yet the metaphors of apocalypse has helped and can help, just possibly, to enliven the fragile and down-to-earth hope of communal life, even urban life, transformed transnationally and renewed ecologically. Hope for a planetary health, human, and so much more than human. This is a hope that must not be confused with optimism. Christians, said Karl Barth, are not optimistic or pessimistic. We are hopeful. I don't always agree with Barth, but he got that right. Optimism doesn't work even in a temporarily friendlier United States. Our national exceptionalism, even when muted politically, temporarily at least, pounds on economically. And meanwhile, the challenges to democracy, let alone climate, are not diminishing. And now the weaponized challenge to a specific democracy is wreaking the horrific destruction in the Ukraine. Russia's aggression will force for some time the redirection of international attention, resources, and energies away from global warming. Yet the landmark report just out from the International Panel on Climate Change makes clear that there is no time for such a redirection. There is no time to lose. At the same time, Europe really may be able to lead in using the crisis as a chance to move seriously toward renewables. And the US might follow, but this is disturbingly uncertain. As Peter Kalmus writes in the New York Times a few days ago, tragically, the Biden administration is choosing to expand the fossil fuel industry at this critical moment. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki recently bragged that US production of natural gas and oil is rising and approaching record levels, and that trend lines also point up, as if these are good things. The administration has approved new drilling permits at rates far exceeding even Trump. Fossil fuel executives and investors are planning to increase production indefinitely, at least through 2035, demonstrating their belief that the politicians they've bought will continue to ignore the public's desire for climate action. End of that quote. In other words, no reason for optimism on the US front. At the same time, some glimmers of the chance of a modest and earthy hope for the New Jerusalem, a modest and earthy New Jerusalem, do peek through. Solar and wind are now cheaper in much of the West than gas and oil. Cost of batteries is way down, making electric vehicles viable. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being invested by governments and businesses into clean energy. And the following statistics are heartening. Before 2015, the world was on track to warm by 4 degrees centigrade by 2100. Now it is on track for 3 degrees. And if current commitments are met, the best outcome is probably not possible, which would be keeping it to 1.5 degrees, but getting it down and keeping it under 2 degrees is possible with these commitments being met. And that would be livable. So it is all the more important right now not to back down on your own public work in churches, civic institutions, and movements, in your neighborhood, with your friends, and on the issues that matter to you most, and hopefully on the intersection of those issues with environmental justice, since it may not be your central one. In the process, the old apocalyptic vision might refresh our immediate struggles with a sip of its water of life, which in its utopia, it insistently offers as free of charge for all. Free, clean water, material and metaphoric for all, another current resonance. And it envisions an urban civilization no longer dominated by military or economic might, in which the representatives of the nations all come riding through the open gate. That multinationality suggests how this worldly is the dream. The gates are all open 24/7. And as the riders ride in, they are not accompanied by the four horsemen of colonization, war, economic injustice, and plague and natural imbalance. But perhaps those four colorful horses will toss off their riders and join in the peaceable multinational celebration. In terms of theological horsepower, what does this all mean? Perhaps first of all, that Christians can push back firmly against the narrative of a simple absolute ending. It simply isn't in the Bible. Rather, there is the prophetic dream reading of much catastrophic destruction, but not the end. And out of that chaos come the radically renewed heaven and earth. Rather than reading this as a brand new creation supernaturally fabricated, we may read it as a prototype of a world radically renewed, a world transformed by the conversion of our species to the work of justice for all creatures and the healing of the creation, at least of our little earth speck of the creation. The metaphors of a terrestrial resurrection shines through the final vision. Can this very physical resurrection help to provoke a deep and broad Christian reconnection with the rest of nature, the physicality of nature, and so with God? I suspect this requires the kind of work involved in your commitments to ecology and spirituality. Theologically, such work demands a refreshed and refreshing sense of the creaturely creative texture of our ecology, of the dense intersectionalities binding all natural creatures to each other and each to God. We are only in relation to the Creator in and through our relations to the creation. No creature is an exception to the condition of fleshly finitude, to the condition of creaturely interdependence, of vulnerability, and of creativity. Yet, of course, all creatures, indeed all creatures in all of our relations together, do not add up to the Creator. God is a mystery that doesn't add up. But we might dream read the divine as the relationship of all our relations, the intersection of intersections in which we live, move, and have our becoming. This God is not supernatural in the sense of separate from nature, but maybe in the eco-theologian Sally McFaig's classic sense, super, natural, as in hypernatural, the nature of natures. This is God not just in relation, but as relation, which the Second Testament's transcription of God as love certainly does intensively suggest. And as we read in Augustine, wherever there is love, there is Trinity, a lover, a beloved, and a fountain of love. Then we can talk not of God as an object on whom we can lay endless doctrinal propositions, but rather a fountain always already pouring out in relation, in and through and before all of our language. A particular kind of relation, the love relation. And love, by the way, is not an important notion in John's Apocalypse. The Apocalypse is no gospel, all the more reason to read it mindfully in its present force field, I might say minefield, which requires reading it always in conjunction with the metaphors of creation. And this means shaking Christianity free of the notion of the creation as a simple once for all beginning, leading to some imminent end and supernatural conclusion. The messianic figure in the Apocalypse declares, I am the Alpha and the Omega. So how do we read that? I think in this way: the I am eliminates the distance between Alpha and Omega. It evokes the new beginning we can each and all together make now, always now, in our own lives and loves, in face of whatever endings we face. The doctrines, the metaphors of creation and eschatology do not then exist perched at the two extremes of a timeline. That I am is here with us, here and in Minneapolis now, not to do our world work for us, not to intervene at some last minute and fix things. Even if I did hear early on a childish voice in my head asking a few weeks ago, "Oh, please God, grant Putin a heart attack." And then that wish for God to intervene gets met with another voice in my head, a little bit sarcastic, a voice of disappointment, of strained faith. But in a state of apocalyptic mindfulness, I find both of those voices in me get answered by a more honest, a more faithful voice, the voice of a theology that recognizes that God does not work through omnipotent interventions from above, no matter how desperately we pray. That just isn't what God is. Divine power is indistinguishable from love. It does not act to control, but to call, to inspire, to lure. The divine lure is a core concept of process theology, a movement crucial to my thinking for, oh dear, half a century. As process theology sees it, God does not interfere to overpower worldly processes. God lures with possibilities, possibilities that may feel impossible, that the creature may choose to realize a little bit or more, or not at all. Faith in such possibilities does not mean that they will actualize themselves. The actualization is up to us. Love does not control, but is there for us and embraces, takes into itself whatever we do with those possibilities. Prayer tunes itself to the love. It makes the actualization of the more loving possibility less impossibility, less of an impossibility, more of a real possibility. Such non-optimistic hope is what the eco-activist Rebecca Solnit calls hope in the dark. It gives no guarantee. It requires that we face the danger, even that we face the apocalypse. As the great African-American author and activist James Baldwin wrote decades ago, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. In other words, we will not escape great challenges, some perhaps collectively traumatic, but we might together bear with them in the spirit, and do so in apocalyptic mindfulness of our planetary intersectionality, with the apocalypse mobilized against the end of time. Our time might twist open into more inviting possibilities in time to avoid catastrophes of the ever doomier sort, social, nuclear, ecological. In the meantime, our intersections will keep tangling us up, both for worse and for better, for closure and disclosure, for doom and for redemption. The overheated specter of apocalypse won't just vanish. It may, however, help to reveal, unveil possibilities for swift and sane transformation in the face of the cruel facts. These possibilities do sparkle in the dark of improbability, and some may appear as last chances, but they signal real chances, holy possibilities, They flow from that amorous fountain into and through such concrete actions as, for example, your formation of the new MA in eco-justice. So we can pray that in facing the fragility of our planetary life, human and otherwise, a critical mass of us come to embrace our creaturely entanglement. And that as we grieve, hope, and struggle together, we each recognize the amazing grace that flows to and through us, to and through each of you and all together. We will keep hearing the eagle's cry of lament, and not just for us, but for Earth's inhabitants. But if we listen, we hear another bird song too. So I want to end with a bit of Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the song without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. An apt, springy birdsong for your chill land, and with all that is on our shoulders to do, amidst shifting, strange extremities, let's keep each other tuned to that hope that never stops. And now I look forward to your thoughts, your questions, your comments. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you. Do we have questions from here or there? I'm sure we have questions, reflections.
I know it's hard on Zoom, folks. Even just classes are hard for people to be spontaneous in their comments and questions. So don't overthink them.
Dr. Wheeler, didn't you assign your students to have come with questions? We can prompt them. Yes, Frank.
I am sensing a note of optimism that I've not felt in some time.
You're asking if there is a note of optimism after all?
Yes, he said he's sensing a note of optimism, in fact. And,
Oh dear. I was trying to avoid optimism and just sound a note of hope. But I realized that distinction is a little fuzzy. So maybe I don't feel too bad that you heard a note of optimism. But I always keep trying to go with Karl Barth on that. You know, as Christians, we're not optimists or pessimists, we're hopeful. Hoffnungsreich. I see Lois, but I'm not going to pick out hands and names, right? You're
okay. Being a pragmatic process theologian, just today met with people from our city of Prior Lake who are looking to put up a 5-story condominium on beautiful green space. And my heart is grieving, not just because of ecological issues, but the aesthetic issue.
right.
And how do we stop the capitalistic, you know, I think it's a done deal. We had a meeting at our condo, which is next door to the one they proposed to put up. But they're going to be taking away possibly pollinator gardens and a rain garden and redoing this beautiful park that the Rotary has contributed to, all in the name of progress.
Yeah.
And these things are generally so far down the road before people become even truly aware of them. And I'm very disheartened. But I wondered if you had, and we're letting our feelings be known, and we're going to go to the preliminary planning commission meeting for the permits and that type of thing. But how radical, does getting radical and activist, I don't know. These things usually are done deal before you get involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's a powerful example, Lois. And of course, there are versions of it going on in every city, and have been going on, for many, many decades, but have this new ecological meaning now. Mostly it was an aesthetic meaning, pure and simple, before, when people objected, or it had to do with class struggles and relocation of property. But now it's so fraught with the importance of just keeping as many trees as possible, who do us this incredible service of sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering it, as well as cooling urban spaces, not to mention all of the social and psychological benefits of having as much green space as possible. So, right, it's a profound problem. I think it's great that you're already doing what you're doing, that you're going to the board, and no doubt getting as many people as possible to come along. I have a friend in a town in Pennsylvania who ended up getting involved in that way about 10 years ago, about some property that was going to take down trees and intrude on a park and on the public view of an access to the river in this lovely park space in Pennsylvania. And it was a very highly financed project, and it was a town that was struggling financially, so it seemed like a done deal. But my friend Glenn Maces really turned that around, because he got so many people stirred up and mobilized, that they got increasingly organized, and it then seemed no longer like it was worth it. But it's only because it was clear that they were going to the core group was going to keep causing trouble. And so that it was going to be too uncomfortable for the town council and all. Now, my friend Glenn, he was a full-time philosophy professor at the time, ended up getting elected chair of the town council finally. Now he's trying to pull back and retire from that, as well as teaching and get some writing done, but he's also still remaining very active because it's crucial. So that's just a little example, but it does happen that these projects, even when it seems that they're late and very, very much beyond any undoing, can get stopped. But it's about,
we can plant seeds too for the future if it doesn't work this time.
If it doesn't work this time, it can be clear that next time there are people who are on the lookout and who are going to act earlier and faster and going to make it very uncomfortable. That's right. It might not work this time, but consciousness has been raised. And just the more you can encourage your folk to get word out and take it seriously and get other people taking it, the more I think it gets around. It's a good conversation topic. It gets people together in a neighborhood. So I think it's great that you're working on it.
Well, thank you. It just started. But the
Yeah.
people in the condominium did respond, and they raised very good questions for the community development director and the city manager. So they're aware of that people do have a voice and concerns. So thank you.
That's great.
Thank you for your lecture.
Yeah, we have a few comments or questions in the chat. Let me read one by Stephanie Pescatelli. You speak of the unveiling of intersectionalities inherent in intersections or conflicts and tensions within and between humans and images. Curious how your project of minding and dream reading images might translate to possibilities of how we see, relate to each other through this revealed conflict. Trends such as cancel culture and certain reactive ideology of purification and purgation on all political sides. Does this text or methodology have anything to say about possibly generating agency and erotic energy released by conflict? I think I read all of those words. I didn't understand them all, but I think I read.
That's a really rich question, Stephanie. Thank you. And it might take a book to respond adequately to it, so I won't respond adequately. But I hope that this apocalyptic mindfulness does have something to do with generating agency, precisely by entering into this metaphorical zone where agency is often getting blocked, right? Because the sense of apocalypse often is precisely what makes us feel like our actions are futile, like it's too late, in terms of just this little personal apocalypses, and then these big ones that I have been talking about. So it does seem to me that by facing the metaphors of the text, given its huge, largely unconscious influence, but also vivid and sometimes conscious influence on our civilization, it's actually likely to unleash some energy and some agency just by allowing a more honest confrontation with it. I certainly found that, and I, as someone who, in the last millennium was really revolted by the text, just really found it terribly deterministic and destructive and loveless, as well as sexist, right? So nonetheless, entering into it turned me around, and reading people and talking to people like Elizabeth Shussi-Forenza, who had a very different view than I did, really helped. But it began a process, and I find that, again, in this century, getting into it releases energies, because it gives a space in which we can face the scale of the threat that we're looking at, and we face it with this strange, dark but meaningful support of an ancient prophetic legacy. Is that erotic energy? Well, I tried to suggest a little bit of that by playing on the erotic meaning of the unveiling, right? It's a very sexy metaphor, since it really was mainly used in ancient Greece for that most sexy moment of all, the unveiling of the bride on the wedding night, within the misogynist terms of ancient civilization. That's the big erotic moment. And I didn't want to just repress that anymore. I mean, I don't know that John was thinking about that meaning in developing that term. I mean, the apocalypse was already a broad genre that he didn't invent. But when he then ends with the erotic kind of imaginary of the marriage and its celebration, I don't think that's just coincidental, though I don't know how conscious it is. But clearly there's already a stirring of an erotic energy around the hope for a radically renewed, humane and ecologically lush city. But how this translates, you see, your answers, your question can't possibly be answered in the time I have. But the sense of the intersectionalities that are the tensions between how we relate to each other through this. And you're talking about you ask about cancel culture and the reactive ideologies of purification, right? I'm hoping that when the sense of of cancel or of purification feels oppressive or repressive, then looking at the way a kind of apocalyptic energy is being misused there is very helpful, because often the misuse of apocalypse, in an absolute kind of good evil dualism with a final solution, is what's going on in overstatements of purity and purgation and the attempt to be all good. So I think working with it is important. I mean, the book is not pure in that way. I mean, one has to go to the Gospels to break free of the dualism that certainly continues in the book of Revelation. But I think it's a dualism worth working through. Yeah, I
Got
hope
questions coming fast and furious on the chat here.
Okay.
John
Great.
Binda asked a question. Oh, so yeah, another John, a different John asked a question about the apocalyptic horse symbolizing racial injustice in Minneapolis, not just capitalistic economic forces inducing it. You've spoken about the intersectionality of racial justice and economic or environmental issues. These are things on our minds here, of course, in Twin Cities, as with everywhere, but yeah, would you care to speak to that?
I don't think I can identify one of the horses strictly as racism, but I think it's very meaningful to think of the white horse, since it's the horse of conquest, as bearing racism. It's just there were other forms of conquest that John of Patmos was thinking about. He wasn't thinking exactly about racism. He was thinking about a kind of antecedent to it. I mean, in as much as the Jews could be lumped together as a race and subject to forms of oppression by the Roman Empire. But I wouldn't want to overstate the understand any sense of racism already there with that white horse. But we can say that white horse of conquest and colonization then is precisely the horse that galloped on over to Africa and that lugged back a hideous number of human beings to die in slavery here. So racism is carried by that white horse.
Thank you. Any questions from here? Back to the room here. Nancy.
Dr. Keller, thank you very much for your lecture. In Facing Apocalypse at the beginning, you do this amazing work of querying the messianic cloud that becomes a woolly lamb, that becomes a gray hair, a woolly headed, breasted, bronze-legged image. I mean, it transforms so much, and really, I'm curious how you are finding, or how people are responding, or we're coming into Lent, or we're in Lent, but coming to Easter, and this idea of the resurrection of the Lamb. These are such powerful symbols at this time in the Christian church, but yet the Revelation certainly queries this messianic unveiling of the messianic one. And I'm curious, what are you finding people responding to your dream reading of that figure, that metaphors?
Oh, you might be one of the first to respond to it in just that way, sort of in relation to Easter and making the connection of the messianic unveiling then to the celebration of Easter, of the resurrection. I mean, as people are reading it, I think they're picking up on the way the resurrection of this lamb who still bears the signs of slaughter, right? So it's a white lamb and is covered with blood, and that's the bridegroom. So I think they pick up on it, how it's a little strange that I emphasize the strangeness of the image of that bloody lamb, that the goriness of the wedding. I mean, it's a figure of a messianic figure, that a figure of a messianic scene in which the grief process is ongoing. Right? So I think that might be the main takeaway that I'm hearing from the emphasis on that particular image, that the Easter celebration doesn't wash off the blood, not in the book of Revelation. The marriage doesn't wash off the blood. The eroticism of the unveiling of this new maiden of a city doesn't simply erase that blood. I think that's important, that it's not a disconnect from past history, even though it's a transformation into a very joyous future. It doesn't dissociate from what that blood means, that means more than just the crucifixion, but all the suffering that is crystallized in the crucifixion, and therefore in the blood of the Lamb. Does that make sense?
Actually, I was focusing more on your reading of the paps, and that this figure is breasted, and you query the Messiah. So, I mean, the blood is good, but maybe I'm thinking more of how you query the gender and
The querying and the querying of the query.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks for pulling that up. Right. There just is that figuration of the paps, meaning the Old English, the King James captures it, the breasts. Many translations in English lose it because it suggests some kind of bisexuality or hermaphroditism. It definitely is a queerness right there in the paps, right, of the Lamb is also the bridegroom. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that out. One can't go too far with queering the book of Revelation. I mean, really, no doubt there's a ferocious heterosexuality at work there too, a desexualized heterosexuality. But the visionary images have their own intriguing strangeness.
Thank you. We have a question from Vicky Gaylord here in the chat. Do you see a connection between the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, the repairing of the world, and a reframing of apocalypse as something other than a fiery end to everything?
That would be really beautiful to work out more. Yeah, right. I mean, the sense of tikkun olam is deep in the prophetic tradition, and John and his prophecies are nothing apart from the Jewish prophetic tradition, and therefore the tikkun olam. But clearly, there's a harsher edge to his tone. It's more of the spirit of that tikkun olam in the rest of the New Testament than there is in the book of Revelation, and yet it's at work there on its more painful, more political side. Yeah.
Questions in here? Comments? Max asks about theopoetics and what an apocalyptic theopoetics might look like, or green theopoetics.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Well, that all has to unfold depending on what you do and what you all do. I mean, I've done what I can in the book to perform a minor version of apocalyptic theopoetics. but I very much appreciate the way the term, the metaphor theopoetics is moving around. Increasingly, people are enjoying using it almost as a synonym, or at least a metonym for theology. I'm not ready to put on my stationery that I'm, I'm professor of constructive theopoetics, because I want to keep the connection to theology in its historical depth and its current breadth. But I love the way in which theopoiesis works, because it works to say not just something about language operating poetically when it's closer to inspiration, when it's closer to revelation, when it's closer to prophecy or to hymn, when it's more scriptural, it's more poetic. So there's that meaning, and one wants to bring poems in, like Emily, but it also has the original sense of poiesis, to make. So to make, to do, to practice. So theopoiesis is also a God practice, and even in a certain way, a God making. I've reflected on that in a couple of essays, what that means. Not that we're making God up, but in doing constructive theology, we are constructing our concepts of God. And apocalyptically, that was always going on. I think it's helpful to become really mindful of the theopoetics, both the literary sense of the poetic, and to encourage it, makes for good sermons, but also to encourage the sense of practice that is a way of embodying the divine.
Well, there's a question by Hardian. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but question about chapter 4 in your book, where there are contrasts between divine violence and mythic violence, binary oppositions. And then the question is how do you deal with binary oppositions or dualism like that in the letter of Revelation in the light of process theology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that if one finds that there's some kind of persuasive force being exercised by some particular strong binary, and certainly that force is excessive, coming from the text of Revelation, then one wants to enter into the tension of that binary. So the opposition of good and evil, and the hope would be to get beyond a mere oppositionalism, or the hope, at least, of theologies I consider wise and theopoetic. And this is where one always needs more than John of Patmos in order to use images from Revelation, because he is in the thrall of strong binaries, and for good reason. And sometimes I am, sometimes you are as well. Sometimes the difference between justice and injustice, between between white supremacism and racial equality, between ecological responsibility and ecological destruction. Sometimes the binary is really blastingly clear, right? And you can't just relativize it. But I love the way process theology works to turn binaries into contrasts, so that at any given moment, the binary that we're gripped by, we recognize as operating within ourselves in some kind of relation, and not simply in opposition. The relation might be oppositional, but there's some kind of connection. And the more that one can find the the root, the ground in which the binaries link up, in which the opposition actually makes contact, the more one might have a chance to work transformatively with it. So the more that I can locate in myself roots of racism, my heritage on my mother's side, the white family, yes, that's the name, the white family, and the heritage of slave owning, plantation owning ancestors in Kentucky. That's my legacy on that side. And the more I can own that, recognize that, be taking some responsibility for that, realize that I don't ever have available a position of pure virtue, because I've gotten benefits from that side. I've loved some of those once still alive racists. So to recognize that I'm implicated complicates my situation. It makes me less pure if I want to do anti-racist work, but it makes me more honest. So it makes me less binary, like I'm an anti-racist working against racism. It makes me aware that my whiteness is complicated as well. So that and that my attempt to cross that binary, it is always involved in difficult contrasts within myself. I think this is just an honesty with which one works better with even basic good evil binaries. In the Book of Revelation, it's hard to get it, that sense of contrast. I think one has to retreat for meditation to a gospel and meditate on love of the enemy, for instance, to start undoing the binaries of good and evil, without therefore undoing the actual opposition, without undoing the recognition of evil as evil and good as much better. But to recognize that these aren't pure separate opposites is, I think, the way of wisdom and the way that process theology works towards turning all binaries into more creative contrasts.
George asks about mourning. Mourning what is lost in order to imagine what might be. What can you say more about what that mourning might look like?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think a lot of us experience that at a very personal level. That until we can really mourn certain losses, for me, what stood out, it was at a certain point in my life, it was the loss of a very important relationship, and I wanted to move right on to other ones, and they weren't working, and it was certain recognition of the need to do that grief work, to do that mourning, that then allowed me to grow in the way that would allow new beginnings of new relationship, for instance, right? So and I think this is so much the case, isn't it? That the giving ourselves a chance to grieve, to let go, is such a crucial discipline. And for me, these, when I have to grieve for something, even grieving certain deaths recently, it's not that I know how to just like take time to weep a lot. I'm not good at that. I had, too much trauma as a child, so tears got, I think, pretty badly stifled in that circumstance. But I've found other ways to grieve. Sometimes it's just letting myself go completely inert and passive for a day, and then for other stretches. So you find out what it is you need to do. Just for me, that might be a lot of extra sleeping. It might be sitting and doing nothing for long stretches. as much as then allowing some remembering work. And I think we have to do that publicly and politically too, that we have to have ways of grieving together, sitting together in silence. Group meditations are very, very good that way. I mean, I imagine that part of your work in the theological school is learning how to facilitate personal and public grief work. And it's not to get what's lost out of your system, it's really to get it deeply in your system, to internalize, so that what's lost is now mindfully a part of you in a different way than it would be without that grief work. And then you're open to fresh outreach, to new beginnings that otherwise would get soured by the ungrieved grief. And I think we have to have regular episodes of grieving about what's going on in the Ukraine. I realize I've had to just let myself collapse a little bit around that. It's not weeping, I don't do that, but collapsing. And yeah, we have to allow ourselves that registering of the loss, because then I think it empowers us to work against more unnecessary loss.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but we had a question. Max had a question about the rest of the question. Could you go up to Max's questions? What is radical life-giving making in the face of consumerism, rejecting mass production?
What is, yeah, that seems really important, Max. Yeah, okay, thanks for coming back to it. What is radical life-giving in the face of consumerism? How do we make something with all that mass production going on? Yeah, I guess we need to really experience in ourselves and create the experience for others of life-giving that's precisely not about giving stuff. Giving someone some water when they're thirsty, that's something else. Giving to causes that matter, that's great, that's beautiful. That's the opposite of the kind of consumerist giving and taking that we're trying to get free of. So in the face of consumerism, I think recognizing the apocalyptic forces that are at work, recognizing how non-innocent this mass production is crucial now. And it's just so clear. I mean, the new studies showing that little tiny particles of plastic are apparently down in great proportions at the very bottom of the ocean. This wasn't known. It was assumed until recently, and now it's known that they're there in significant enough proportions to be altering the capacity of the ocean to do the work it does for the planet. That's open science. So to just get that the production of the plastics that we has such long-term destructive effects, some much more overt in the smoggy skies that we see, but to help our people recognize that mass production is producing mass destruction environmentally, not to speak of the terrible imbalances economically that it's creating, helps at least to take a little of the pleasure away from the consumerism. But it helps to detract from the strange innocence that people feel about consumption in this country. But it's up to us to teach those connections, that this consumerism is really consuming the basis for life, for our species and endless other species in the future.
Thank you. I think we are at time, 9 o'clock. Want to give you another round of applause, appreciating your work.
I'm sorry if there are questions I didn't get to.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for your questions. People joining us on Zoom, thank you so much, and have a hopeful night.
Thank you
Take
for
care.
that word at the end.
Yes.
And sorry not to be able to hang out in the hallway with folk.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Again.
Well, that's great. I very much look forward to that, Kyle. And good night, everyone. Hope to see some of you really in the flesh in 3D sometime in the imaginable future.